this opportunity first to say thank you for coming. This is, I believe, a great opportunity, not only for us to talk about things that have both occurred over the last 30, 60, especially maybe in the last 30 days, but actually to give you a progress report on what this administration not only has been doing, but our philosophy and our values in an emphasis on collaboration when it comes to public safety. With me, and I would actually go left to right, but because of the nature of what we're doing, I'm going to do the following. I'm going to provide you with a little bit of an overview of what we're here to talk about today, to entertain your questions, to get questions answered directly to things that we are able to speak about from our public safety vantage point, and then to hear from the participants that are actually doing the work, emphasizing the collaboration that has been going on, and that what we believe is going to be a very, very good outcome as this administration continues to emphasize the two goals that the mayor said from the very beginning. We're going to do something in a new way, and it was a new day in a new way. And when we brought that forward, what we did tell you also is that in public safety, it would be the #1 thing that we would emphasize on, and #2, that education would play a major part of that. And how we got to that was going to be through collaboration. But let me start off with the following first. Within the last 30 days, the country has actually experienced quite a lot of shocks to its system. And to say that race has been part of the discussion just over the last 30 days, I think underplays what really has gone on in the country for probably over 30 to 40 years. Trayvon Martin is dead, and Trayvon Martin was killed. And we respect what happened with the jury and its role in finding what happened. But I think it calls us to actually take a moment of pause, to sit down and ask ourselves, what are we doing in order to make sure that there are no more Trayvons? And yes, to even think about the fact that on a daily basis around this country, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of Trayvon Martins that are killed. African-American men and boys kill other African-American men and boys, and that's a fact. To be acknowledged, yes. To be dealt with honestly through a collaborative approach also has to be done. And Mayor Nutter has actually taken and assembled a huge team to attack this problem. Everyone working in their lane, but actually everyone working across lanes and in a collaborative way to make sure that we can to answer the question, what are we really doing to make sure it doesn't continue to happen? And we believe that over the last 5.5 years, you've seen and are seeing the efforts of all these folks that are up here, and even more that who they represent, really take part in doing something about what we are trying to get done, which is a safer city. So first off, let's talk about our commitment in education. We've had Philly go to college, and Dr. Shore is here. And in a moment, she's going to not only talk about why that's important, Philly go to college, but also the mayor's important role in stating why education is going to be the #1 way of reducing violence in the city. So Lori will come up and talk about that in a second. Second, when you have trauma in a community, you have to have a way of dealing with trauma in a community. It has to be a trauma-informed way of dealing with it. And Anne-Marie Ambrose, who's up here as commissioner, has taken a painstakingly look at and has transformed the Department of Human Services. But it's, again, part of our approach as a collaborative in dealing with what we're doing in violence in the city. So after Lori talks about education, Anne-Marie will come up and talk about DHS and its role in this matter. Poverty is no excuse for violence. Let me say that again. Poverty is no excuse for violence. However, it is something that we have to deal with, which is why we ended up having, as part of the strategy, and including in this strategy, a strong commitment to work, a strong commitment to having a job, because if you have a job, perhaps you're not going to end up taking an opportunity to just be destructive, because you're actually doing gainful things that are able to do something for family, friends, and loved ones. Those are the things that are important, and those are the values that this administration has put forward. And in our collaborative, we have two partners, one with our RISE office, represented by Bill Hart, who's here, and he will talk about how and what we have done in order to make sure that we can offer a different way to our second chance returning citizens. These are things that will help provide an environment for peace to actually be on the streets. So after those three that will come up, I will then come back and I will talk a little bit more about the other aspects of our collaboration. I will be talking with, and you will hear from Councilman Jones, who's the chair of public safety. You'll hear from Richard Ross, who's obviously here as Deputy Commissioner for the Philadelphia Police Department. And you'll hear from Rich Negrin and John Farrell about Philly Rising and why that is important. But I'll be back up. But let's first start with Lori.
Good morning. One of the things that we know is that when students are actively engaged in education, when they receive their high school degree, when they can either connect to a job or to college, that they're more likely to be safe. Won't go into all the research, most of you know it. When you look at the folks we have who are victims of crime and who are perpetrators of crime, there's one thing that goes across all of that, and it's that they have not always had the successful educational experience we'd like them to have. And besides the work that has been very visible over the last couple of months in terms of funding the school district and that primary source of education, there's other work that happens that's very important. But I want to point to the fact that we've actually increased the high school graduation rate here in this city. Wasn't that long ago, I can remember when I was doing this work in another capacity, that we were only in the high 40s in terms of how many ninth graders made it through high school. Now we're at 64%. Not something we want to rest our laurels on, but it represents a change in the futures of thousands of Philadelphia school children and Philadelphia citizens. But there are also things that we do here in City Hall that impact those outcomes. One of those things is there's a re-engagement center, and Anne-Marie, I don't know if you're going to talk about the re-engagement center. So there's a re-engagement center that we put into place over at the school district that had folks from city employees who worked with health and human opportunities, got that right, to make sure that students who had dropped out could come back and get re-engaged in the right school experience. The district has opened alternative high schools where students who are overaged, undercredited, these are students that we usually lost to the streets, who can come back and be engaged. So there's all of that work, but we also do making sure that kids who can graduate go on to college and get the sort of job that allows them to have a family-sustaining wage is an important thing. So right here in City Hall, we have an office called Philly Goes to College. It went into place in February of 2010. We've reached out to over 25,000 Philadelphians, and we have a website that's been accessed 166,000 times. I can tell you all of that, but the thing you need to know is for students and actually even young adults and adults who have always wanted to go to college or are thinking that maybe this is the time to do that, we have been helping them one-on-one downstairs, but also through going to recreation centers, summer programs to talk to folks about the nuts and bolts of getting to and through college. We have a handbook we've developed through graduation coaches. So there's all sorts of things that we've done that make sure that students have the best possible educational outcomes. Obviously, the school district, the archdiocese, the charter school sector, that's our primary K-12 way of getting things done around education, but there's all sorts of things around the periphery that support that, particularly our most at-risk students, and I think Commissioner Ambrose will talk about some of those, and she's been a great partner with the district and with the charters on this sort of work.
Good morning. I'm Anne Marie Ambers. I'm the Commissioner for the Department of Human Services, and our mission is actually to prevent abuse, neglect, and delinquency. So we have a lot of responsibility for many of the things that we're talking about today, and most of this is about prevention. 5 years ago, DHS wasn't seen very much as a good partner, and so we've spent the last 5 years trying to develop collaborative partnerships with other city agencies and everybody who touches the lives of children. And so that's been a really important aspect of our work. Really strong partnerships with mostly Judge Doherty, who couldn't be here today because he's at a trial conference in Hershey, but is represented by the Chief Probation Officer, Pedro Castro, who's here today. Partnerships with the district, partnerships with the behavioral health system, partnerships with everybody who you see here. We have the strongest partnership now with the police department than I think we've ever had before, as well as with the district attorney's office. Child welfare is a community responsibility, and if the mayor were here today, he'd say that we are in the business of public safety at DHS, because our job is to keep kids safe. And that needs to be done at the community level. And so what we've tried to do over the last 4 years is really study what's happening nationally and implement something called Improving Outcomes for Children, which is a community-based accountability system with neighborhoods partnering with community members who receive services from DHS. And the whole idea there is very similar to what Rich and John are going to be talking about with Philly Rising, is we have a responsibility as government to know what our citizens need. And so a huge theme that you'll hear around the Violence Prevention Collaborative work that we're doing is about community engagement and our responsibility to really talk to people and listen. And as a result of listening over the last couple of years, we've developed a much stronger partnership with the school district. So I'm going to highlight some of the services that we provide at DHS, because sometimes people don't know what we do. We actually do the soups to nuts. So obviously we run the detention center, and in partnership with the court, we have to keep kids safe and secure who might be a threat to society. But the most important job we have there is a youth development role. It's really about telling them that if they re-engage in education, if they make positive choices in their lives and make different decisions, they don't have to live like this. They can actually be productive, contributing citizens in this city. And so we take that role very seriously. We're also doing the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative at the, with the court at the detention center, which is an Annie E. Casey Foundation model that's done national work around disproportionate minority contact, which is really looking at race in a different way, and how kids who are of color often are more likely to be locked up in the juvenile justice system, and really trying to take a look at that and do something about that, because it's a very important matter, as Everett discussed. Some of the other work we do is obviously the whole prevention of abuse and neglect, and that's the focus of what we do at DHS and the focus of what we're trying to do with improving outcomes for children. But a lot of our prevention services are about the school district, and so Dr. Height and his team have been fabulous partners. Part of being a good collaborator and partner is listening and being flexible, and so recently, because of the problems with the district, DHS has had to take a little bit more of a role in trying to support students at the school level. We have an education support center that we started in October of 2010. We're actually going to add staff to that education support center. In lieu of maybe not having counselors at the school, we're going to have social workers that we put in the schools that have the most DHS-involved youth, so there'll at least be somebody on the ground that can talk to teachers, can talk to principals about issues that they're concerned about with the students that they're seeing, so that we can work together to provide some prevention services. And so we'll be talking more about how we're going to launch that, but it is something that we think is incredibly important and urgent given the funding situation for the district. We also fund out-of-school time programs. So we have about $25 million invested in after-school programs that keep kids safe. A lot of the violence problems that we have today are because kids don't have enough to do. They're not engaged in education, they're not engaged in positive youth development activities, they can't find jobs, and so DHS is really trying to work with other partners to make sure that we can find ways to keep them involved in very productive activities. So I think that's plenty. Thanks.
Good morning. Bill Hart, the Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Reintegrated Services for Ex-Offenders. We've been put on a simple mission and that is to coordinate and collaborate resources with all public safety partners and certainly nonprofit and for-profit service providers to remove some of the barriers that many of the returning citizens face. With that said, last year, our service delivery model sounds something like this. We began our work with our men in custody behind the walls, life skills, financial literacy, personal development. We are servicing 6 of the facilities on State Road currently. That model connects with our guys as they get released and come to rise. And at that point, service delivery models sounds like job readiness, community personal responsibility, life skills, employment services, and on the back end, we have resources to do expungements for guys that make it through our process. To address the enormous challenges that are associated with generational poverty, and certainly the pull of gravity of guys returning to the same neighborhoods that they left and the unfortunate consequences of decisions that they've made, the city of Philadelphia is hosting what I believe will be one of the more comprehensive ex-offender expos Tuesday, July 30th at the Convention Center. Clearly, in everybody's mind, employment is that most effective recidivism reducing tool. With that said, we have 100+ employers combined with 100+ service providers to address some of those other barriers and collateral consequences of choices that we've made. The city has stepped up in a very big way. We're hosting an expungement clinic where we'll be able to remove some of those convictions, the arrests that have not led to convictions on many of our guys' dockets that are clearly barriers for employment. That along with, we're kind of excited about the cyber cafe. There'll be 100 notepads, desktops to address email addresses, to address applying online, along with literacy, and more literacy, because it's very important that our guys are competitive in this job market. We anticipate a very large crowd. We ask that if there's any way possible, as this message gets out, of the resources the city's bringing around reentry, is that pre-registration is mandatory. Our goal is to provide the most effective touch and reach to resources in a quality way. Thank you.
So when you end up talking about how we've approached this, now you have to talk about what the effect of the approach is, and it is best when we all work together. And I think the next few persons that I will ask to come to the fore, starting with our own and my own councilman, Councilman Curtis Jones, because it's really not just the executive working in a vacuum. We have to work on this together, and we have to actually have partners that understand that this is not just something, and public safety is not going to be addressed in a one-shot deal. But you have to listen to one another, understand what the program is, know where you want to get to, and actually achieve the goal getting there. So that's the backdrop on what we call Philly Rising. But before I bring up Rich and John Farrell, I'd like to hear from my councilman, Chairman. Thank you.
I can't say enough about the Nutter team, and particularly his Chief of Staff, Mr. Gillison, as to the effort you see here today. When you think about individual efforts, it's like individual strands that are trying to accomplish something, and they have their impacts, but when you begin to bind them together, it becomes a stronger effort to pull together that way to accomplish a goal. So when you see the police department here and you see them working with DHS, I see Recreation, who does summer movie theaters out in playgrounds so that young kids have activities. That's that working together. From the 50,000-foot view of a real-time crime center, for me, as a district council person, boots on the ground if you would, the impacts are such that there was a young man, 17 years old, Bernard Scott. He was shot to death at Tustin Playground. He lost his life because he stopped to watch a fight. What we discovered as we began to look at it more closely was that in that area, in that playground, there were 4 firearms stashed around the rec center, there were young people that were attending Overbrook High School across the street, and we began to understand that there were fights between neighborhoods and rival schools. The same word for crisis is this in China is the same word for opportunity. Out of that tragedy, out of that crisis, we began working with the administration, the 19th Police District, the school district. We worked together with public property and cameras. We worked together to come up with safe avenues to get back and forth to school. So 23 schools closed, one of them in my district, but what we were able to do working together, the immediate response by this administration was they put 16 cameras in Tustin Playground to match the 90 cameras and coordinate with the 90 cameras in Overbrook, to work with cameras in Bieber, on 54th Street, Lansdowne Avenue, to create avenues of observation for young people to go back and forth to school. We also went up and traveled into Dr. Walter Palmer's high school, where we took best practice of how to engage the community just to walk kids to safe bus stops. So we're incorporating all of these efforts in time for September to anticipate some of the mergers of schools. Lamberton is going into Overbrook. Germantown is going into Roxborough High School. And we hope to be ready for that, to avoid Bernard Scott kind of issues. But what you see here is not just the right hand of punishment, but also the right hand of fellowship. We're working with the top 30 hardheads, or soon to be diamonds, in the community, to work with them to deal with their issues by way of examples we've taken from you, to say and give them options, to say you can do the right thing and we'll help you. Find a job, find tutorials, find opportunities for a life. Or if you are, as they young people say, about this life, then we're going to help you along your way, because you will not take away from us another Bernard Scott because they made the mistake of watching a fight. So we're proud to be a part of the team, and hopefully can produce out of this good public policy, good legislation, and good appropriations to budget to help out in this effort. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councilman. Thank you, Everett. I want to try to talk about community and talk about, kind of crystallize some of our thinking amongst this group. And when I say community, I want to make something very clear. It's not just about the folks on the street, the people in the neighborhoods. It's about this community too, the law enforcement community, the city community, city council, all of us working together on this issue. What you're seeing is not just a community, it's what I would call an ecosystem of public safety, right? That's the difference here. We have a long way to go, and Everett and the mayor and I talk about this all the time. This is the beginning of a conversation. There's nobody dancing in the end zone. The numbers we're seeing are extraordinary. It's an incredible story here in Philadelphia. But this is just the beginning of a conversation around a community approach that Philly Rising is a big part of, but that all these partners are a huge part of. We have a long way to go to convince our kids that the way of the gun is not the way of a long, healthy, successful life. We have a long way to go. And you have to ask yourself, and Everett and I have had this conversation in private. This is a little inside baseball. You know, we can have policing and programs, and we can have great projects, but the truth is, if we don't figure out a way to get our kids to never pick up that gun in the first place, and you have to ask yourself, when you feel powerless, when you feel like you have no security and no identity, when you feel like you have no economic opportunity, and you take that gun in your hand, and you feel the weight, and you feel the grip, and you feel like you can take care of yourself. The power can be something that you get drunk on, if you think about it. You take the power of life and death in your hand when you're holding that gun. That's what we're fighting. How do we get kids to feel powerful, to be empowered without that handgun in their hand? And that's why, as Everett said, it's about economics, it's about education, the way Lori said, it's about good structures and family support at home, if you get that support at home, you don't need it on the street from the guys who carry those guns and hand it to you when you're a young man. So what you're seeing is our effort to get behind the problem. We know we're not going to arrest our way out of it, and really be able to address what are some of the core root causes of violence in the city of Philadelphia. And that's what this approach is all about. Philly Rising is a big part of that. It's a community-based, heroic efforts on the part of many of our folks inside of the community, everyday citizens, everyday heroes, trying to make a difference every single day. I was in the 22nd district last night speaking on a panel on gun violence. It's our most violent district in the city of Philadelphia. There's a reason why there are 3 Philly Rising neighborhoods embedded in the 22nd. And even there, they're seeing a 30% reduction in homicides. And you know, it's just the beginning. This is an approach that needs to keep going and keep going and keep going. And the only way we're going to get there is, and this is you know, a message to the media, is if you are an equal partner in this conversation, because what we need is broad community cultural change. And if we don't empower our citizens and inform them of our efforts and let them get involved and tell this story in a way that builds momentum, that keeps this going, if we lose this progress and we take huge steps backwards, shame on all of us. So.
Thanks, Rich. The next piece that I wanted to talk about is what people would normally say is what these programs are talking about primarily. We have a great partner with Seth Williams, our district attorney. We have a great partnership between the district attorney's office and our police department. And I want Deputy Commissioner Rich Ross to come up and not only talk about that partnership, but how the various tools that we've been able to marshal, our tools with ceasefire, our tools with YVRP, things that have worked over time, that have stood the test of not only data-driven analysis, but also standing the test of all of how we get the violence to go down, and how that partnership with the police department is now, as part of this collaborative, is working today. So, Commissioner.
So, as indicated by everybody before me, we have a very close working relationship with all the parties up here. Under Commissioner Ramsey's leadership, we've developed a number of crime fighting and community policing plans, and we're excited about a lot of them. We do work very closely with the DA's office. We're very excited about their zone chiefs, their geographic prosecution. It helps us to get in touch with who's who out there. And that kind of dovetails into my other point about police and community. Commissioner Ramsey, since his arrival, has been stressing that from the door. He stresses the fact and the need for us to develop plans where we can really get to know the people out there. And so from that, you have plans like the police service areas, where we subdivided, all our districts, and we push down responsibility below the rank of the commanding officer down to lieutenants and sergeants, so that they just get beyond that temporal responsibility of working a shift and going home without worrying about what happened. Instead, now I have 24-hour responsibility for a given area, which makes me more connected to the area I police. One of the other things that we're doing, we're most excited about, is probably our footbeat patrol. You may have read about this, you may have heard about it. It's not a feel-good program. We put rookie officers right out of the academy in some of our toughest areas. But we don't just do it for crime-fighting purposes. It's a big police-community relations tool for us. Some of these young men and women get out there and they develop relationships with community in ways that you can't begin to understand. And it gets them out of that 3,000-pound vehicle and racing from call to call and getting to know that in every neighborhood there are people who are willing to help us. One of the favorite expressions I have in the world is a great deal of what you see depends on what you're looking for. And we tell a lot of these young people that when you decide to look for something good in people, that's exactly what you'll see. If you do the opposite, that's all you'll see. If you're only looking for bad in people, that's all you'll see. So if you look for something good, sometimes, you'll see that coach out there who's out there helping kids. You'll see the lady who's tutoring people. You'll see the person who's sweeping up their block each and every week. And so we want our officers to understand that, because it's at the core of what we do and what we believe. And we can't get it done unless we have these collaborations that everyone here spoke about. So we're very excited about the synergy that takes place, in the city. And it's important, you know, that everyone, and I'm actually glad that I was one of the last ones to speak for that reason, because we're so accustomed to coming up here first, feeling like, honestly, some of the brunt is always on us, and we never truly believe that, nor do we want all the accolades for things that go well. But I think that everyone, I'm excited about the fact that our commanders down to our police officers embrace this concept. So we're very happy about what's going on, and we're very cautiously optimistic, but nonetheless, we're optimistic that things will continue in the right direction.
Thank you, Commissioner. A couple of the other things that I think that I need to just point out to you. You know, Trayvon Martin happened, and people started asking questions about, well, there's criticism around in the ether world, what I call, well, you know, no one really wants to talk about black-on-black crime. And then I sit back and say, well, 2 years ago, Mayor Nutter, along with Dr. Bell from Casey Family Programs, had a discussion about Cities United. Cities United was formed 2 years ago out of the feeling that you needed to have a place for mayors to understand what are the best practices to dealing with what is an issue that is a hot-button issue because we are Americans, race. It's the unanswered question for us as a society. But Cities United provided mayors with an opportunity not just to come together and talk about what was going on in their cities, because when you look at the data, it doesn't lie. 85% of the killings, whether you're in a big city or in a small town, are usually going to be African-American men and boys killing other African-American men and boys. If you happen to be in Houston or Los Angeles, this is where, instead of it being African-American, they'll say that you now have Hispanic and or Latinos killing at the same rate. So we have a discussion that needs to take place, because if you don't acknowledge your problem, you can't do anything about it. So our commitment 2 years ago was to engage mayors. And I can tell you as I stand here today that we now are collaborating and bringing what we do here in Philadelphia across the country, because we are a national model for this engagement. And Cities United allows us to talk about this in ways and provide, literally cover. Mitch Landrieu in New Orleans, as he says, happens to be white, just like we all just happen to be who we are. But we all have the same problems as mayors. And Mayor Nutter and Mayor Landrieu, working with all the mayors across this country, are dealing with this and have been dealing with this issue. So it just hasn't been a Trayvon Martin matter. They've been dealing with this violence issue because we need to be brought to task as a country. What are we truly going to do? Well, there are things we can do, and Philadelphia's been leading the way. We also have been leading the way with the Sandy Hook principles. And I'm hoping that it's not the first time you've heard about that. But it's our way of trying to take something that was purely Philadelphian, that came out of the Leon Sullivan principles that dealt with apartheid in South Africa, to actually engage gun manufacturers in a dialogue around best practices. And Maya wanted to say thank you again for being the person who actually works on that within the mayor's office. It's these kinds of programs, these kinds of principles that we're talking about on a national level that mayors have been engaged in and the discussion. And yes, our city, with the support of City Council, has actually said that we are engaging the gun manufacturers with our pension funds and saying, if you can't be responsible manufacturers, then maybe we shouldn't be part and parcel of being part and having you in our portfolio. But dialogue works. Collaboration works. I've now gone to a couple of very engaging NRA discussions, because instead of us just being across the aisle and not talking to one another, we should be engaging with one another, because ultimately it's going to take compromise to get where we need to be as Americans. So finally, what I want to talk about is one of the announcements, because we were chosen, as many of you know, as a National Forum City on youth violence prevention. And part of that was that we won, it's a grant from the federal government. It puts us part of one of 10 cities that is dealing with violence in a way that allows us to use our practices, but also to learn from others. And a partnership with the Stoneleaf Foundation, I'm glad to say that we have had Richard Greenwald, who has come on board to kind of help us pull this collaborative together and to continue this collaborative, and as a matter of fact, help us pilot something that's been in the 22nd District. And so I would like to introduce to you Richard Greenwald, who's the executive director of our, and an assistant to the mayor, talking about this collaboration that he is going to bring together. So Rich.
Good morning. Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you to the co-chairs of the Youth Violence Prevention Collaboratives, Commissioner Ambrose, Commissioner Ramsey, and Judge Doherty. I'm going to introduce the Youth Violence Prevention Collaborative, so I appreciate you indulging me in this opportunity. 2 weeks ago, the mayor shared his plan for the reduction of poverty called Shared Prosperity. However, the mayor and all of us today know there can be no shared prosperity without a shared commitment to protect our children's first civil right, safety. As the mayor's lead on youth violence prevention and reduction, which is my single purpose in the administration, and as a Stoneleaf Foundation Fellow, it is my charge to advance a strategy to eliminate violence as the major cause of death and harm for youth in our city. This isn't just the job of the mayor, law enforcement, or the school district to reduce youth violence. All of us must accept nothing short of safe communities, schools, and families. While truly we are all affected by violence, it's overwhelmingly devastating for African American Philadelphians, the result of complex and systemic negative influences for generations. Mayor Nutter has said it time and time again, and President Obama said it the other day, that black young men and boys need to know their country cares about them. As a father of 4 young children, and in my new role in the city, I want to tell and show all our sons and daughters in Philadelphia that their city cares about them. As we move forward, we have been developing a strategy by assessing what's happening in our community, looking at best practices across the country, and tapping experts and stakeholders in our city, and working to have a constant youth voice guide our strategy and its ultimate implementation. We're also starting small, focusing on the 22nd Police District, where there is a high instance of shootings. It's essential to note that we're working with our partners from the Department of Justice, who are leading the National Forum on Youth Violence Prevention. This forum is a network of communities and federal agencies that work together to prevent and reduce youth violence. Established at the direction of President Obama in 2010, the forum brings together diverse perspectives to learn from each other about the crisis of youth and gang violence in the U.S. and to build comprehensive solutions on the local and national levels. Finally, the Philadelphia Youth Violence Prevention Strategy effort is about developing a structure and framework to address violence not just in the next few years, but for the coming decades. This effort is about understanding where we spend tax dollars and its impacts those investments have. It's not about creating new programs per se, it's about understanding how we more effectively use what we have. We know there's great work going on across our city. We'll be coming to you for your ideas and input, and I look forward to working with you, and I've enjoyed working with everybody up at the dais today. Thank you.
So finally, one thing I will say is that the President said it, I think, best just yesterday, or might even be the day before, because sometimes I even lose my days. But he said that, you know, we need the investment in our communities. We need the investment in our in jobs. We need to really get past what I call the partisanship and the gridlock on so many different levels. Collaboration works. It's what you see up here. It's what you have been able to experience. It's what our numbers tell us we need to do. It's what our data tells us we need to go, and we're following what we need to do. The last thing I'll say before I begin taking questions is that, you know, what happened in New York over 25 years ago didn't start with Mayor Giuliani. It actually started with Mayor Dinkins. who ended up saying that if you listen to people, if you engage them with your police department, if you can build the trust, if you acknowledge that there are problems, but you have a commitment to making sure that your authentic voice will be heard in dealing with violence, if you do what you need to do as a government, you can make a difference. Well, we've believed that from the beginning. This has been our mantra from the beginning, and we have built this collaboration slowly but surely, and it will stand the test of time, because I think Philadelphians deserve nothing less, and I want to thank Mayor Nutter for giving me the opportunity to kind of head up and do what I believe is a life's work. We're willing to take questions. Walt.
Mayor, if I may just ask you a matter of timing. The mayor is out of town on a pre-scheduled trip. The police commissioner is out of town on a pre-scheduled trip. Was it the Trayvon Martin situation or some other matter that made the officials feel they felt compelled to come forward with this information today rather than perhaps wait until they were here?
I think that it's a combination of everything, Walt, to be quite honest. The bottom line is that we've been working on getting this particular, what I called an opportunity to talk and to share what has been a question in many minds. That is, what is the Philadelphia way, quite frankly? What is the collaborative way that you've put in place? And we had been talking about getting this done, and then obviously the Trayvon Martin matter happens. We also have the National Urban League here, and I've been working representing the administration at that matter, and even they were saying, well, a lot of stuff is happening. They see what's going on in Philadelphia. It looks like you guys have the right approach. They want to hear more about it. And so we said, well, let's make sure we continue to tell people about what we're doing, how we're doing it, and why we believe it's important. Other questions? Thank you. Oh, sorry. Yes.
Hi. Could we get any more information from Mr. Greenwald about what's happening up on the 22nd?
Sure.
Well, I can tell you that we're developing a strategy and a plan that we'll be able to release after we present it to the Department of Justice in September, so there'll be more detail. But I can tell you that we're spending a lot of time in the 22nd looking at what our investments are, what our assets in the community, what's happening with crime, what's happening with children, and we're looking at it in a variety of ways. We're looking at what can we do around law enforcement, what's going on around prevention efforts, what's going on in intervention, meaning what are we doing with court programs, what are we doing with diversion programs, what are the programs that are working in the community, what do we know about what other programs are working around the country, and do we have them in our own communities? So we're assessing that, and we're looking for the gaps. And so, I mean, that's the effort is start small in the 22nd, understand all the stuff that we're doing already, and then setting a set of common goals and measures that kind of align us all, not just in municipal government, but in the private sector, in the social services, et cetera, so we can kind of attack this in a unified way.
I will also tell you that part of the partners that we have, Ceasefire is working in the 22nd District, as is YVRP, working in the 22nd District. I know that there's been some realignment up there as well, but it is a comprehensive approach to what we're doing and how we're doing it. And this is our opportunity to tell you how we're doing it and why we're doing it, because values do matter.
Can I add one
Sure.
of the things? I think one of the best things that we've done is we've engaged youth in our efforts. So we've had a number of focus groups held by great people in this room who've been assisting us. And we're listening to what the youth's voices are, and they participate in our work groups, and they've shared information with us that they think is important for us to know. And so some of the key findings that the youth tell us is that they're feeling hopeless, they're feeling unsupported, that there's not enough to do, and so we really need to listen to those voices and react. And Sue Slauson, who isn't here today, has actually really taken it upon herself to create some major programming in the Martin Luther King Rec Center in the 22nd Police District. And so if Commissioner Ramsey was here, he'd say, we got to start, there's an urgency with everything he does. And so we're kind of, before the plan is even finalized, we're doing work every single day. And the youth voices that inform that work are really valuable to us. Any
other questions? I thank you very much. Thank everyone here.